For more on all of this stuff, let's bring in Charlie Hurt, co-host of Fox and Friends Weekend, and Mark Penn, chairman of the Harris Poll and president, CEO of Stagwell. Is that how I pronounce it?
Yes.
Got it. All right. Gentlemen, good to see you. Let's start, Mark, about how the latest polls showed Trump kind of underwater on the economic issue, which he was very strong on going into the election. That was taken before this week. This week, there were a cascade, I would say, of victories. First of all, you look at the market. The market is, the NASDAQ alone is up about 6% for the week today, based on progress on the trade talks. The EU commissioner came in and said, if it comes down to China flooding the European Union with all of the goods that were meant for the U.S., we're going to be dead set again. We're going to be with the United States against China. Countries like Japan are siding now with the U.S. in their battles against the bad will of China over the many years. So it seems to me, and by the way, there's also the LNG deal that the Europeans talked about. They're going to be buying a lot more of our coming LNG bonanza with the deregulation. So if the polls were taken this week, I would suspect he wouldn't be underwater in economic views.
Well, it takes a little bit longer for things to cycle through the public. Look, something had to give here. That give was either going to be the countries under tariff pressure, our country under tariff pressure, right? And there was a little bit of each, right? I mean, the president exempted some things. He gave 90-day relief. Some of the countries are coming into play. Of course, as he said, there'd be turbulence. But remember, the voters are focused on one thing: inflation. So the thing about a tariff policy is a tariff policy generally will raise prices but increase employment, or at full employment. So,
but when they fill up at the pump, they're seeing the prices go down, Mark. Obama said that was the most important indicator of all on inflation.
But it's not coming through yet in the polls because all the talk of tariffs has kind of clouded that out. If the president kind of stabilizes tariffs and brings inflation down, that's where the voters gain, where he gains among the voters.
Woe be to me to disagree with the greatest pollster ever to live in the world, but I would suggest to you that the price of eggs and the price of gas are the most important indicators for average Americans. I would just say that, but there is this impression, Charlie, that the media, I think, is coming out with the exception of certain media like Fox News, that there is a disaster that we are in the beginning of a disaster because of the tariffs. I would agree with you on that. And you just look at one article in The Hill today, which quotes two people. One, a, quote, former House senior national security aide that goes unmentioned. He's anonymous, saying she, referring to President Xi, somehow, notwithstanding all the bad things China does, is coming out of the last week looking like a winner and a statesman. Then there's the New York Times that quotes this Biden administration official saying, quote, this game of chicken has done nothing but enable Xi Jinping to boost his standing in and outside China, while the U.S. appears uninformed or unmoored. This is after a great week when the NASDAQ is up 6% in just 1 week. And it has led to certain pundits being chastised on television. CNN had one of them on there, a couple of them on there, and Batya, who you see on Fox quite a bit, struck back. Roll tape of that.
How do you not trust China but trust Donald Trump? Is Planet Earth we're talking about? Yes, very much.
I think that's really sad that you trust our greatest adversary more than the President of the United States, who was elected by over 80 million of your fellow Americans.
So what do you make of this, Charlie?
Yeah, I think Mark is right about this, that a lot of it has to do with all of the talk about the disruption in the economy. And obviously there is disruption. The price of eggs, the price of gas are down, and that's significant. But, Donald Trump is not running a campaign anymore. He's not running a campaign prosecuting the case against the Biden economy. He's trying to do things, and he's trying to do very big things, like reorient the economy and stand up to China. Obviously, it's painful. Anybody would have done it if it were not painful, but it is painful. And so you have to kind of go through this slog. If you're going through hell, the number one rule, don't stop. keep going. And that's what Trump is doing, and he's going to keep going. And the bet is at the end of all of this, he's going to get real wins. And I would also argue that...
And by the way, that's a bet that is now being taken by investors on Wall Street.
Yeah, and I think we're seeing it in the markets. And also, by the way, the fact that the markets sank, we already knew Wall Street doesn't like tariffs. We knew that all this was going to happen. But I would also argue that for Trump voters, they have been on to China long before any politician in Washington was.
Yes.
They love watching Trump go toe-to-toe with China. But the problem when it comes to polling is that, he's not running a campaign every day demonstrating that. Right. He's actually under the hood doing the hard work. By the way,
you know why Americans, I think, share that disdain for China is because they've been shopping on Amazon for years now and realize that stuff, when it says made in China, you don't trust it.
Well, also, their parents and grandparents unbolted their own factories in places like Martinsville, Virginia, and sent them to China. And it's generational bitterness towards China. And Donald Trump was the first politician to come along and recognize it and try to. And now he's doing something about it.
All right, Mark, what shocked me about the polls this week, again, looking backwards, was even on immigration. The president is slightly underwater in a couple of these polls. And today's news, and we're going to talk about it with former AG Bill Barr coming up in this show, but today's news about those two judges who were arrested, who were apparently, allegedly, harboring illegal migrants who had really bad track records. One of them was spirited out of the back door of the judge's courtroom. And she had to be, I don't know if it was tackled, but she had to be chased down by ICE agents and then was perp walked away. How do you think that's going to affect people's feelings about what's going on in immigration?
Well, I think it's very interesting when you look at the polls on immigration. If I ask about Trump's policies without Trump, support is 70 to 80%. Wow. Okay? So when you put Trump in there, it comes back down to, in my poll, 50 to 55%.
Fascinating.
Right? But that means he has room to grow. That means as his presidency rolls out, look, the media is not for him, right? They focus on every single negative thing they possibly can. But underneath, when it comes to immigration, the universities, right, anti-Semitism, all of those policies, he has overwhelming support. And so I think.
And of course, the Democrats are having a lot of self-inflicted wounds.
Well, and the Democrats have fallen off a cliff.
Yeah.
I mean, they have gone from ratings in the 40s to the 30s, even the 20s, right? I've never seen such ratings. And so I think he has room to grow. I think, again, you can't expect miracles in the first month, especially when it's a polarized country. Mm-hmm. And the job as president is to bring that polarization down. Right? During an election, you can win with 48.
Yeah.
A successful president wants to get 65.
I just want to squeeze one other thing in, forgive me, but Kim Strassel, who we all know and love, had a piece, relatively critical piece about the last 100 days of the Trump administration, or the first 100 days of the Trump administration. She said the first 2 months went well, but this last month there were a lot of self-inflicted wounds. I just want to read a little bit. She said, the past month has seen the Trump team on the back foot, and it's mostly self-inflicted. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth can cast aspersions on the hoax press and the deep state, but it was his hand-picked loyalists at the center of the storm. Whether he erred in hiring them or in firing them, the erring was his own. Now, to which I would say she may be right in saying that. I mean, he did pick these people who had to be fired for one reason or another, but at the same time, you should judge people by what they do. Yeah. The Army now has already, just in 3 months, reached 85% of its recruitment goals. 85%. It's going to go way over 100%.
We're not 6 months into the year.
It's extraordinary what he has done in bringing recruits in. This is the heartblood of any military, is the ability of people to fight and die for their country.
And over the past 4 years, if you ask generals what is the greatest threat to our military, every single one of them would have told you recruitment numbers. It was in the toilet. Yeah. And Pete Hegseth and Donald Trump have turned that around dramatically. And if that's all they accomplish with the military. That will be an enormous, enormous accomplishment. And I do think that this issue with about the press and when you attach Trump's name to it,
yes,
that's always been true about polling.
Yes.
You've always had that problem. And what that tells me is that the press is so insanely negative about everything that Trump does that it does affect people's views and it does color them.
Guys, we have to leave it there. I'm getting a wrap. I've been getting a wrap for 2 minutes, but I have to congratulate you for being a grandfather again.
Thank
Number
you.
two.
And congratulations to you.
We both
as well.
we congratulate each other. Nothing better than having grandchildren. Mark, Charlie.
I can't wait.
Great stuff. Yeah, you got a lot to look forward to. And be sure to watch Charlie, by the way, Fox and Friends Weekend every Saturday and Sunday from 6 to 10 a.m. Eastern Time. That's over on Fox News.